My teacher singled me out and told the class, "Everyone line up and tug her ears until she learns to listen." Imagine this, the person who publicly humiliated and physically hurt you as a child, the one who left you with lasting scars, ends up completely at your mercy decades later. What would you do in that situation? Because that's exactly what happened to me. I was just 9 years old, a little girl really, and my crime? Staring out the window. See, Mrs. Delford was droning on about multiplication tables, but my dad had already taught me those. I was bored, so incredibly bored, and outside a tiny bird was meticulously building a nest in a tree. I wasn't bothering anyone. I wasn't talking, not making a sound. I certainly wasn't disrupting anything. I was just watching that bird. Suddenly, her voice cut through my peaceful observation. "What's so interesting out there?" she snapped. I mumbled, "A bird's building a nest." And then came the icy words. "Maybe you should just go live with the birds, since you clearly have no interest in learning here." The whole class erupted in giggles. 9-year-olds, right? They laugh when the teacher makes a joke. But Mrs. Delford wasn't laughing. Not one bit. Her face was stone. She marched straight to my desk, and with a terrifying wham, she slammed her hand down so hard my pencil literally jumped off the desk and clattered to the floor. My heart stopped. She snarled, "You are disrespectful. A problem child. I've tried everything with you and nothing works." I was terrified. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'll pay attention. It won't happen again." But she just leaned in close, her eyes narrowed. "Sorry isn't good enough this time," she hissed. Then she told me to stand up. I stood. "Because you do what teachers tell you when you're 9 years old and scared out of your mind." She told me to go to the front of the room. My legs felt like jelly, but I shuffled forward, my heart beating so hard I could hear it pounding in my ears. She then told the entire class to form a line. 23 children slowly got out of their seats, shuffling into a line right in front of me. Some looked confused. Others were grinning with a terrifying excitement. A few looked just as scared as I felt. Mrs. Delford's voice was chillingly calm as she explained the rules. Each student, she said, would walk up to me and pinch my ears as hard as they wanted. "This," she declared, "will teach her to listen." She said, "This is what happens to children who don't pay attention." And then came the kicker. If anyone refuses to participate, they will be next. The first kid was Oliver, who sat behind me and always kicked my chair. He walked up, a mean, satisfied grin spreading across his face, and grabbed both my ears. He twisted them so hard I saw stars. Pain exploded through me, but I didn't cry. I wouldn't cry, because I knew that's exactly what Mrs. Delford wanted. The second student was Piper, who I thought was my friend. She pinched quickly, her eyes wide, and I swear she mouthed sorry as she hurried away. The third student pinched harder. The fourth harder still. By the 10th student, my ears were burning, throbbing, swollen, and despite my absolute resolve, hot tears were streaming down my face. Mrs. Delford watched the whole thing, her arms crossed, a sickeningly satisfied smirk on her face. She announced, "This is what discipline looks like. Parents these days are too soft. Children need to learn consequences." 23 children pinched my ears that day. Some were gentle. You could feel their hesitation, their guilt. Others were vicious, clearly enjoying the power. By the end, my ears were bright red, pulsating, and I literally couldn't hear properly for the rest of the afternoon. When I got home, I told my mother everything. She looked at my ears, her gentle face transforming into something I'd never seen before, a fierce, quiet rage. But not at me. The next morning, my mom walked me to school. She didn't go to the principal's office. Oh no. She marched straight to Mrs. Delford's classroom, right before the first bell, and closed the door behind her. I don't know exactly what was said, but I could hear my mother's voice through the door. It was loud, sharp, and it went on for a very, very long time. When she finally emerged, her face was calm again. She just told me to have a good day and said she'd pick me up at 3. For the rest of that year, Mrs. Delford wouldn't look at me. She never called on me. She never commented on my work. She just pretended I didn't exist. And honestly, I preferred that to what had happened before. I thought that was the end of the story. I really did. But life, as it often does, has a way of circling back. I grew up, moved 3 hours away, and became a nurse. I was good at my job. Patient, kind. I never forgot what it felt like to be completely helpless. So I always made sure my patients never felt that way. Then, 26 years after that horrifying day, I was assigned a new patient, an elderly woman who had fallen and broken her hip. She was irritable, demanding, complaining about everything. The food was wrong, the bed uncomfortable, the nurses too slow. Nothing was good enough for her. I walked into her room to check her vitals, and she looked at me with watery eyes that struck me as familiar. My stomach clenched as I glanced at the name on her chart. Delford, have you ever been a teacher? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She looked surprised. Yes, she said. Taught elementary school for 32 years before retiring. Thankless job. Children are so disrespectful these days, and parents are worse. Nobody appreciates teachers anymore. My blood ran cold. What school did you teach at? I asked, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. She named my elementary school. Do you, I continued, remember a student who was caught staring out the window at a bird? Her watery eyes squinted, trying to place my face. Then it clicked. Her expression shifted. She went bone white. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I watched her hands grip the sheets, her whole body seeming to shrink back into the pillows. For a split second, I saw a flash in her eyes that looked like pure, unadulterated fear. She remembered me. I pulled my stethoscope from around my neck, stepping closer to the bed. My hands were shaking, but I forced my face to remain blank. I picked up her chart, pretending to read it, though the words blurred before my eyes. The irony hit me like a physical blow. She was completely helpless. She needed me to eat, to use the bathroom, to move from her bed to a chair. She couldn't do anything without me. I set the chart down and wrapped the blood pressure cuff around her arm. She flinched when I touched her. I pumped the cuff, watching the numbers climb. Her pressure was sky high. I wrote it down, unwrapped the cuff, all in silence. She was staring at me with those wide, watery eyes, clearly trying to figure out what to say. I didn't give her the chance. I need to check on another patient, I said, my voice flat. I'll be back later. I walked out of the room, down the hall, and practically ran into the supply closet. I slammed the door shut behind me, leaning against the metal shelves, boxes of gloves and gauze digging into my back. My heart was pounding in my throat. I forced myself to breathe slowly, in through my nose, out through my mouth. 26 years. It had been 26 years since that day in the classroom. But standing in her room just now, I felt 9 years old again. My ears started to burn, a phantom pain, like they were remembering. I touched them without thinking. They felt hot, even though nothing had happened. I closed my eyes and I saw the line of students. Oliver with his mean grin, Piper mouthing sorry, the others pinching harder and harder until I couldn't stop crying, and Mrs. Delford, arms crossed, looking satisfied. I opened my eyes, staring at the medical supplies. She was old now, broken, scared, and I was the one taking care of her. Life was strange. My supervisor walked up to me while I was washing my hands at the nurse's station. She looked at me funny. Are you okay? She asked. I'm fine, I said. Your face looks strange. I told her I was just tired. She nodded, but her eyes lingered, clearly not believing me. I grabbed my tablet to check on my other patients. Everything all right with the new patient in 412? She asked. Yes, everything's fine, I replied. She just seems a bit anxious. Probably just pain from her hip, I offered. My supervisor nodded and walked away, but I knew my mask was slipping. That night, lying in bed next to my sleeping husband, my mind replayed every single detail. The classroom, the bird building its nest, Mrs. Delford slamming her hand, her voice telling me to stand, to walk to the front. The 23 children. I remembered every face. Oliver twisting my ears until I saw stars. Trying so hard not to cry. Failing. The tears running down my face as she watched. My husband stirred. What's wrong? He mumbled. I ran into my elementary school teacher today, I whispered. He made a sleepy sound. Oh, that's nice. I don't know, I said. She's my patient. He jolted awake then. You're serious? Yes. Did she remember you? Yes. He was quiet for a long minute. Are you okay? He asked softly. I don't know that either, I admitted. The next morning, I walked into Mrs. Delford's room to help her to the bathroom. She smiled, a fake, nervous smile. How are you doing? She asked. Fine. How's your family? Fine. How long have you been a nurse? 12 years. Oh, that's wonderful. You must be very good at it. I didn't answer. I helped her sit up, swing her legs over the side of the bed. She winced. Ready? I asked. Yes. I put my arm under hers, helping her stand. She was shaky. We walked slowly to the bathroom. She kept trying to make small talk. Are you married? Yes. Kids? No. You'd make a good mother. I wanted to laugh. Instead, I helped her into the bathroom and told her to call me when she was done. I waited outside the door, listening. She was trying so hard to act normal, like we were just any nurse and patient, like she hadn't lined up 23 children to hurt me when I was 9. I wasn't interested in pretending. Later that afternoon, the physical therapist arrived. I had to be there to monitor her vitals. He was young and cheerful, talking to her like she was just a sweet old lady. He explained the exercises. Mrs. Delford nodded, looking nervous. He helped her sit up. A small sound of pain escaped her lips. He asked if she was okay. She said yes. I watched from the corner. Leg lifts. Grimaces. Then time to stand. He counted to 3. She pushed herself up with his help. She cried out. Her face went pale. And I felt it. A dark, ugly satisfaction. She was in pain. She was suffering. Part of me was glad. Then, shame hit me hard. I'm a nurse. My job is to prevent suffering, not enjoy it. I looked away, writing down her vitals, my hand shaking again. That evening, I brought Mrs. Delford her dinner tray. She thanked me. As I turned to leave, she said my name. I stopped. I want to talk to you, she said. I have other patients to check on, I replied, my voice tight. I remember you, she said. I know, I answered. I remember that day with the window and the bird. I didn't say anything. I know I was hard on students back then, she offered. Hard. That word made something hot rise in my chest. Hard, like it was just strict teaching, like it was normal discipline, not child abuse, not public humiliation, not 23 students pinching my ears until they were swollen and I couldn't hear. I told her again, coldly, I need to check on other patients. She started to say something else, but I was already walking out. I went straight to the break room, put my head in my hands. I needed to get control of myself, to be professional. But every time I looked at her, I was 9 years old again. That night, at home, I couldn't stop thinking. I sat on the couch with my laptop and searched her name. There she was. Mrs. Delford, retired teacher, taught at the same elementary school for 32 years. 32 years. I did the math. She taught for 6 more years after what she did to me. How many other kids? How many other students did she humiliate? How many other ears did she have pinched? The thought made me sick to my stomach. Classrooms full of 9-year-olds going through what I went through, or worse. I found an old newspaper article about her retirement. It called her dedicated. Said she would be missed. The principal said she was old school, but effective. Old school, that was one way to put it. I closed the laptop. My husband asked what I found. She taught for 32 years, I said. He was quiet. What are you going to do? He asked. I don't know, I said honestly. The next morning, I had to adjust Mrs. Delford's foreline. It was kinked. I walked into her room, and she looked up at me. I went to the pole without a word, reaching for her arm to check the insertion site. My fingers touched her skin, and suddenly I was 9 years old. Small, powerless, terrified. My ears started to burn. Actually burn, a phantom pain, like my body remembered even though nothing was happening. I pulled my hand back sharply. Is something wrong? Mrs. Delford asked. No, I said, but my heart was racing. I felt dizzy. I'll be right back. I walked out of the room, found another nurse in the hallway. Can you finish the 4 check in room 412? I just need a minute. She nodded, sensing my distress, and went into the room. I went to the bathroom and locked the door. I stared at myself in the mirror. I was having a panic response. I knew what it was, had learned about it in nursing school, but knowing didn't make it stop. I splashed cold water on my face, forced myself to breathe. You're an adult, I told myself. You're safe. She can't hurt you anymore. It didn't help. My ears still burned. At the end of my shift, the night nurse pulled me aside. Mrs. Delford was asking for you, she said. Specifically, said you were the best nurse she'd had. I just stared at her. What was this? Manipulation? Was she trying to make me feel bad for being cold? Or did she genuinely not understand? Did she really not grasp how huge it was, how much it hurt, how it had stayed with me for 26 years? Either way, I was furious. If she was manipulating me, that was sick. If she genuinely didn't understand, that was almost worse. That's nice, I said, my voice flat. The night nurse looked at me strangely but didn't push it. I grabbed my bag and left. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 10 minutes before I could drive home. My thumb hovered over my mother's number on my phone screen. I could call her, tell her. For a long time I just sat there. Then I pressed it. She answered on the second ring. I told her I was okay, work was fine, and then I told her about Mrs. Delford. The line went silent. Not a thoughtful quiet, but the kind of quiet where someone is trying very, very hard not to explode. Finally, her voice tight and controlled, she asked, "Do you want me to drive up?" I could hear the fury, the same fury from 26 years ago, underneath her words. "No," I said. "I can handle it. I'm an adult now. She can't hurt me anymore." My mother said she knew that. She said she was proud of me, and that if I changed my mind, she could be there in 3 hours. I thanked her and hung up. Then I cried in my car for 10 minutes, because hearing that protective anger in her voice made me feel 9 years old again. The next afternoon, a woman visited Mrs. Delford. I was checking vitals on another patient, but I heard their voices from room 412. The woman, maybe 40, had Mrs. Delford's thin nose and sharp chin. She was talking about her kids, her oldest struggling with math. Mrs. Delford declared schools didn't teach properly these days. The daughter laughed, saying her mother had always been passionate about education, had dedicated her whole life to teaching, and always believed in discipline and respect. I stood outside the door listening. This woman seemed nice. She seemed like someone who loved her mother, completely oblivious to the kind of teacher that mother had been. I wondered if Mrs. Delford had ever told her daughter about lining up 23 children to pinch a 9-year-old's ears. And if she had, would her daughter even believe it? I walked away before they could see me. 2 days later, I had to help transfer Mrs. Delford from the bed to a chair for physical therapy. Another nurse was supposed to assist, but she got called to an emergency. I walked into the room alone. Mrs. Delford looked at me, and her face tightened with fear. I told her we needed to get her into the chair. She nodded, but said nothing. I positioned the transfer board and put my hands under her arms. She winced before I even started moving her. "Count to 3, I instructed. On 3, I lifted and pivoted. Her hip must have twisted wrong because she cried out loud and grabbed my hand. Her fingers dug into my wrist hard enough to leave marks. For a second, just a second, we were simply two people. One person in pain and scared. One person trying to help. Her eyes met mine, and I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not the teacher who humiliated me, just an old woman who was hurting. Then I got her settled in the chair, and she let go of my hand. The moment passed, but something had shifted. Something small but real. I was at the nurse's station, writing notes, when another nurse sat down next to me. "Everything okay with 412? She asked. I looked up. "Mrs. Delford seems afraid of you," she said. "Have you been short with her?" My face felt hot. "I've been professional," I insisted. The nurse held up her hands. "I'm not accusing you. I just noticed the tension. Wanted to make sure you were okay." I realized my mask had been slipping more than I thought. I thanked her. Then I sat there and thought about it. Mrs. Delford was afraid of me. The woman who had terrorized me as a child was now scared of me. I had two choices: request a different patient, or get control of my emotions and do my job properly. I knew which choice I should make, but I wasn't sure I could. I went home that night, wrestling with it. Walking away from Mrs. Delford's care. Letting someone else deal with her. It would be easier, less painful, but it also felt like letting her win somehow. Like she still had power over me, even after all these years. I was good at my job, a damn good nurse. I could provide excellent care, even to someone I hated. That was what separated me from her. She had abused the power she had over vulnerable children. I wouldn't abuse the power I had over a vulnerable patient. I decided to stay assigned to her. Not for her sake, for mine. The next morning, I walked into Mrs. Delford's room to check her surgical site. She was awake, staring at the ceiling. "I need to look at your incision," I told her. She nodded, pulling back the blanket. I put on gloves, carefully peeling back the dressing. The wound looked clean. No signs of infection. As I cleaned around the staples, she started talking. "Teaching was different back then," she began. "Parents expected teachers to discipline children. Nobody understood how hard it was to control a classroom." I kept working on her dressing. "I did what I thought was right at the time," she finished. I stopped what I was doing. I looked at her directly. "Do you really think I asked, my voice dangerously calm, that lining up 23 students to physically hurt one child is normal discipline? Do you think that's what parents expected? She looked away. She didn't answer. I finished changing her dressing in silence. That night, I dreamed I was 9 years old again, but I had my adult mind trapped in my child body. I was standing at the front of the classroom, watching the line of students approach. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't work. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. Oliver walked up first, with that same mean grin. I wanted to push him away, but my arms hung useless at my sides. He grabbed my ears and twisted. The pain was sharp and real. Then Piper came. Then the third student. The fourth. I counted each one. 23 students. 23 sets of hands on my ears. I woke up with my heart beating so fast I thought I might throw up. My ears were actually hurting. Phantom pain from a dream about something that happened 26 years ago. My husband woke up, asking what was wrong. A nightmare, I choked out. He held me while I cried. I cried for the 9-year-old me, who had to stand there and take it. I cried for the adult me, who still carried it around. The physical therapist caught me in the hallway the next day. He wanted to talk about Mrs. Delford's progress. She's not doing as well as expected, he said. Range of motion is limited. She seems resistant to pushing herself. Part of it's physical, but part seems mental. She appears depressed and anxious. He asked if I'd noticed anything. She has a lot on her mind, I said vaguely. Is there something specific bothering her? He asked. I think she's dealing with some things from her past, I replied. He nodded. That makes sense. Trauma and regret can definitely impact physical recovery. I almost laughed at the word regret. Almost. I walked into her room later to bring her medication. She was staring at me again. I'd noticed it over the past few days. She'd watch me when she thought I wasn't looking, then quickly look away. But this time I caught her before she could turn. The expression on her face was strange. Fear mixed with something else. Something that might have been guilt or might have been self-pity. I couldn't tell which. When she realized I was looking back, she dropped her eyes to her hands. The power dynamic felt wrong, upside down. She was the teacher, the adult, the authority. But she was old, hurt, dependent on me for everything, and I was the one with all the control. That evening, she finally said it out loud. I was adjusting her pillows when she spoke. I remember the ear-pinching incident, she said, her voice barely audible. I know it was wrong. I stopped moving. I waited. I've thought about it over the years, she continued. I wish I had handled things differently. Then that familiar sting. But you were a difficult student. You wouldn't pay attention. I didn't know what else to do with you. I was just trying to maintain order. My hands clenched into fists. The justification. The excuse. Even now. Even after admitting it was wrong. She still had to add that I was the problem. That I had somehow forced her hand. I finished with her pillows without saying a word. Then I walked out of the room before I said something I would regret. I went back into her room the next morning. She looked up when I walked in, and I could see she'd been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy. I checked her vitals without a sound. She watched me the whole time. When I finished recording her blood pressure, she spoke. I remember that day clearly, she said, her voice cracking. I think about it sometimes. I know it was wrong, but I was under so much pressure. The principal told me I needed better classroom control. Parents were complaining their children weren't learning. I felt like I was failing. Tears were running down her face now. When you wouldn't pay attention, it felt like disrespect. I wanted to make an example, so the other students would listen. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. I'm so sorry. I don't know what else to say. I put down the blood pressure cuff. I looked at her. I was 9 years old, I said, my voice calm, almost detached. I already knew my multiplication tables because my father taught me. I was bored, so I watched a bird. My voice never rose. Nothing I did that day justified what you did to me. You had 23 children hurt me while you watched. My ears were swollen for days. I had nightmares about it for years. You were supposed to protect children. Instead, you taught them cruelty. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just told her the truth. Then I walked out and closed the door behind me. 2 days later, my supervisor called me into her office. I knew something was wrong. She had that careful expression people get before an uncomfortable conversation. She asked me to sit down. I received a complaint, she began. Mrs. Delford's daughter had called, saying I was being cold and distant, that her mother seemed anxious whenever I came into the room. She wanted to know if there was a problem. I sat there, looking at my supervisor, and I had to make a choice. I could lie, say everything was fine. I could request a different patient without explaining why. Or I could tell the truth. I thought about my 9-year-old self, standing at the front of that classroom, how nobody had protected me then. I decided I wasn't going to hide what happened anymore. I told her everything. About the bird, the multiplication tables, the line of students, my ears burning, the phantom pain I still got sometimes, how my mother had to come to the school, how Mrs. Delford ignored me for the rest of that year. My supervisor's face changed as I spoke. She looked horrified. When I finished, she sat back in her chair for a long moment, completely silent. "I am so sorry that happened to you," she finally said. What Mrs. Delford did was child abuse. She stood up. "I'm reassigning Mrs. Delford to another nurse immediately. You should have told me as soon as you recognized the name." She reached for her computer to make the change. "Wait," I said, surprising myself. "I want to keep the assignment." She looked at me like I was crazy. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "I need to prove something to myself. I need to prove I can be the better person. I won't sink to her level, even when I have the power to do it." My supervisor studied my face for a minute, then nodded. "If you change your mind at any point, let me know. I'll be checking in regularly." I thanked her and went back to work. That afternoon, one of my colleagues found me in the break room. She sat down across from me. "Are you okay?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "You've seemed so tense and distracted all week." I looked at her kind face, suddenly tired of carrying this alone. I told her the whole story, about being 9, about the ears, about finding Mrs. Delford in my hospital 26 years later. She listened without interrupting, her eyes growing wider and wider. When I finished, she just stared at me. "I can't believe it," she whispered. "How can you stand to take care of someone who hurt you like that?" I would have requested a different patient immediately. "I don't think I could do what you're doing." I realized I didn't actually know how to answer her question. Part of me wanted to provide excellent care to prove I was nothing like Mrs. Delford. Part of me wanted to do the bare minimum and let her suffer. Part of me just wanted to understand why she did it. "I don't know," I told my colleague honestly. "I'm figuring it out as I go." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're stronger than I am," she said. I wasn't sure that was true. 3 nights later, Mrs. Delford had a bad episode. Her pain medication wasn't working. She was nauseous, couldn't keep anything down. I was supposed to go home at 7, but I stayed late to make sure she was stable. I adjusted her medication, got her anti-nausea drugs, and sat with her while they took effect. She was vulnerable, scared, and kept apologizing for keeping me there. "It's fine," I told her. "This is my job." Around 9, she finally fell asleep. I sat in the chair next to her bed for a few more minutes, making sure she was really settled. She looked so old and small in that hospital bed, her face pale, dark circles under her eyes. When she'd thanked me earlier, there had been real tears in her eyes, real gratitude. Something about seeing her so utterly vulnerable made me feel less angry. Not forgiven, not forgotten, just less angry. I drove home that night, thinking about compassion and revenge, and what kind of person I wanted to be. My husband was already asleep. I sat in the dark living room, just thinking. I kept coming back to the same question. Why did she do it? What made a person think that was okay? I realized I might never understand, but maybe I didn't need to understand to move forward. Over the next few days, I found myself thinking about my mother, remembering that morning when she walked into Mrs. Delford's classroom and closed the door. I wished I could recall exactly what she said. Just her voice through the door, loud, sharp, protective. I wondered if Mrs. Delford remembered those words, if they haunted her the way the ear-pinching haunted me. Then one night, as I was falling asleep, a memory surfaced that I had completely forgotten. My mother, coming out of that classroom with her face calm but her hands shaking. I told her about my husband. I told her about my work, how I became a nurse, about the life I had built. She listened with an expression I couldn't quite read. It might have been genuine interest. It might have been manipulation. After 26 years, I still couldn't tell what was real with her. When I finished talking, she was quiet for a moment. Then she told me she never had children of her own. She said teaching was her whole life. She poured everything into her students. There was something lonely in her voice that made me see her differently. not as the terrifying authority figure from my childhood, but as a sad, old woman who built her entire identity on control and respect, who now had nothing left but regret and a broken hip. I found myself asking the question before I could stop myself. Why did you do it? Why did you think that was okay? The words came out flat and direct, and I watched her face change. She looked down at her hands for a long time. The silence stretched between us. I could hear her monitor beeping, voices in the hallway, the sound of my own breathing. Finally, her voice quiet and shaky, she spoke. I was angry that you weren't paying attention. It felt like disrespect. I wanted to make an example so the other students would know what happened when they didn't listen. I stood there, holding her chart, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. That was it. That was her reason. A 9-year-old looking at a bird felt like disrespect, and therefore deserved to be hurt. I turned to leave. I didn't trust myself to respond. And that's when her monitor started alarming. Her blood pressure was dropping fast. Her face went pale and confused. She tried to sit up, couldn't. Her words coming out jumbled and wrong. I hit the call button, grabbed the blood pressure cuff to recheck manually, calling out for help. The doctor arrived within seconds, and I was already starting interventions, checking her pulse, repositioning her, getting her oxygen saturation levels. My hands moved automatically through procedures I'd done 1,000 times. I gave the doctor her vitals and medication list without having to think. In that moment, she wasn't the woman who hurt me. She was just a patient crashing, and I knew exactly what to do. The doctor ordered medications, and I had them ready before he finished speaking. I adjusted her flow, monitored her response, talked to her in the calm voice I used with all my scared patients. I worked on her for 20 minutes straight. My training took over completely, pushing everything else aside. Every decision was automatic and correct. When her blood pressure finally stabilized and her confusion cleared, I realized I hadn't hesitated once. Not for a single second. I gave her the same expert care I would give anyone. The doctor praised my quick response and left. I stayed to make sure she was truly stable, then went to the nurse's station to fill out the incident reports. My hands were shaking as I wrote. I kept thinking about how easily it could have gone differently. How I could have been just a little slower hitting that call button, a little less attentive to her monitor, a little more focused on my anger than her care. The thoughts scared me more than anything else that had happened. That night at home, I sat on the couch, feeling strangely proud of myself. I had faced the worst moment possible and done the right thing. But I also felt disturbed by how clearly I could imagine doing the opposite. Being rough with her transfers, forgetting her pain medication, making comments about karma. I didn't do any of those things, but having the thoughts at all made me feel sick. I didn't want to become someone who took revenge on helpless people. My husband came home and found me staring at nothing. "What's wrong?" he asked. I told him about the emergency and about the thoughts I'd been having. He listened without interrupting, then said something that really helped. "You're not like her," he said, "because you're struggling with these feelings instead of just acting on them. The fact that you're questioning yourself shows you have a conscience she apparently lacked." It helped a little, but I still felt unsettled. Over the next few days, I kept having revenge fantasies, imagining being rough when I helped her move, forgetting her water, making snide comments about karma. The fact that I could think these things, even without acting on them, made me understand how easy it was to abuse power over vulnerable people. Mrs. Delford was completely dependent on me for everything. If I wanted to hurt her, I could do it in 100 small ways that would be hard to prove. That power felt dangerous in my hands. I started wondering about her own childhood, whether someone hurt her and taught her that cruelty was acceptable. I hated that I was developing empathy for her, but I couldn't help wondering what made her into the person who would line up children to hurt another child. Nobody wakes up one day and decides to be cruel. Something shapes you into that. She told me one day, while I was checking her incision, that her own teacher used to hit students with a ruler. Her father believed children should be seen and not heard. She wasn't making excuses exactly, just explaining the world she came from. I listened without commenting because I didn't know what to say. That night, I found myself thinking about cycles of harm. How hurt people often hurt others. How cruelty gets passed down through generations like a disease. Mrs. Delford was probably doing what she thought was right based on how she was raised. That didn't excuse it, but it made it more complicated. I did some research online and discovered that her mother died when she was young, and she was raised by a strict aunt. She became a teacher at 22 and taught the same way she'd been taught. I didn't want this information. It made her human. It was easier when she was just a monster. I didn't want to know about her childhood, or her strict aunt, or her mother dying young. I didn't want her to be a person with reasons and pain and history. I wanted her to stay the monster from my memory because monsters are easier to hate. But she was just a woman who learned cruelty from the people who raised her and passed it on to children who couldn't defend themselves. That didn't make what she did okay, but it made it harder to hold on to my anger with the same burning intensity. 2 days later, a message request popped up on my phone from someone named Sarah Jenkins. The profile picture showed a woman about my age with short dark hair and glasses. The message said she had been in Mrs. Delford's class with me and remembered the ear-pinching incident. She said she thought about it often and wondered if I was okay. She asked if I ever got therapy for what happened. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I told her I was a nurse now, and yes, I was okay, and no, I never got therapy. She wrote back within minutes, saying she was glad I was okay, but that she wasn't. She said she still had nightmares about that day, even though she wasn't the one standing at the front of the room. She felt guilty for participating and developed anxiety around authority figures that lasted into adulthood. She said she became a teacher herself, specifically to be different from Mrs. Delford. I sat on my couch, reading her messages over and over. I had spent 26 years thinking about how that day affected me, but I never considered the other students. They were just faces in a line in my memory. Some mean, some scared, some sorry, but all of them just background to my own trauma. Sarah described having nightmares where she was forced to hurt people she cared about. She described feeling powerless and afraid and ashamed. She described learning that adults could make you do terrible things, and you had no choice but to obey. Mrs. Delford's cruelty rippled outward in ways she probably never thought about. She was so focused on making me behave that she didn't consider what she was teaching everyone else in that room. I went to work the next day and walked into Mrs. Delford's room with my phone in my hand. She looked up from her breakfast tray and smiled nervously. I showed her Sarah's messages without saying anything. She took the phone and read slowly, her face changing as she went through each message. Her mouth opened slightly and her eyes filled with tears. She handed the phone back to me with shaking hands. "I never thought about it from the other student's perspective," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I was so focused on discipline and control that I didn't consider the damage I was doing to everyone in that classroom. I thought I was teaching a lesson about consequences, but I was actually teaching children that cruelty was acceptable when you had power over someone." Sarah and I talked on the phone that evening after my shift. Her voice was warm and familiar, even though I couldn't remember her face from childhood. She told me she became a teacher because of that day, not in spite of it. Mrs. Delford showed her exactly what kind of teacher she never wanted to be. She focused on understanding why students acted out instead of punishing them. She created classroom environments where kids felt safe to make mistakes. She said that day taught her that trauma could push people in different directions. Some people repeat the harm they experienced, and some people dedicate themselves to preventing it. I realized I had done the same thing by becoming a nurse who treated vulnerable people with dignity. Mrs. Delford asked me the next morning if there were other students affected like Sarah. I told her honestly that I didn't know, but I would guess most of that class remembered that day. She looked devastated, her face crumpling as she processed what I said. She said she thought she was teaching discipline, but she was actually teaching cruelty. She said she wanted children to respect authority, but she taught them to fear it instead. She said she thought she was doing her job, but she was damaging kids in ways that lasted decades. It was the closest she had come to real accountability without making excuses or justifying what she did. I found myself in the strange position of almost comforting her as she cried. Part of me felt wrong about caring about her pain. She hurt me and other children, and now she was upset because she finally understood the damage she caused. Why should I comfort her for feeling bad about her own actions? But another part of me recognized that her genuine remorse was what I needed all along. Not excuses about pressure from the principal or explanations about how teaching was different back then. Just acknowledgement that what she did was wrong and caused lasting harm. Her tears felt real, and her regret felt genuine, and that mattered somehow. She asked me what she could do to make it right. I told her honestly that there was nothing she could do to undo what happened. The damage was done and couldn't be erased. The best she could offer was acknowledgement and genuine remorse. She nodded slowly and said she understood. She said she would write letters to any former students she could find and apologize for her teaching methods. I told her some people wouldn't want to hear from her, and she should respect that. She said she understood that too. I believed she actually did understand, maybe for the first time. I decided I needed to tell her directly how that day affected me. I sat down in the chair next to her bed and started talking. I told her about the years of anxiety around authority figures. I told her about the trust issues and the way I second-guessed myself constantly. I told her I could still feel phantom pain in my ears when I was stressed. I told her I became a nurse partly because I remembered what it felt like to be helpless, and I never wanted anyone else to feel that way. She listened without interrupting or making excuses. She just took it in, tears running down her face, nodding occasionally. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said simply that she was sorry. She said there was no excuse for what she did. She wished she could take it back, but she couldn't. So, all she could offer was this apology. It wasn't a perfect apology. There were still hints of self-justification in her tone, and her body language suggested she wanted me to say it was okay. But it was real. It was more than I ever expected to get. I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for 26 years. Not forgiveness, exactly, but something close to it. Release. Maybe permission to stop carrying the weight of that day everywhere I went. I realized I had a choice to make about how I wanted this to end. I could hold on to my anger and hurt, which was completely justified. Nobody would blame me for staying angry at someone who orchestrated my public humiliation and physical abuse when I was 9 years old. Or I could choose to let some of it go, not for her sake, but for mine. The decision felt important in a way I couldn't fully explain. I chose compassion. That was the decision. Not because she deserved it, but because I deserved to stop carrying the weight of what happened when I was 9 years old. The physical therapist came in the next morning and told me Mrs. Delford's hip was healing ahead of schedule. He said she'd be ready for discharge to a rehab facility within the week. I felt something unexpected twist in my chest when he said it. Our time together was ending. I'd spent weeks taking care of the woman who hurt me, and now she'd be someone else's patient. The thought made me feel strange in a way I couldn't quite name. Not sad, exactly, but something close to it. I walked into her room that afternoon with her medication and found her staring out the window. She turned when she heard me and smiled in that tentative way she developed over the past few days. I sat down the medicine cup and pulled the chair close to her bed. I needed to say something before she left, something I'd been thinking about for days. What you did was child abuse, I told her directly. The words came out calm and clear. It was wrong, and it hurt me in ways that lasted for decades. She started to speak, but I held up my hand because I wasn't finished. I am choosing to forgive you, I said. Not because you deserve my forgiveness, but because I deserve to stop carrying this pain around like a stone in my chest. Her face crumpled, and she started crying. She reached for my hand and held it while tears ran down her wrinkled cheeks. She said she didn't deserve my forgiveness, but she was grateful for it. She said, watching you work as a nurse over these weeks, seeing your skill and compassion with patients, showed me what I should have been as a teacher. The compliment felt genuine, but I needed her to understand something. I became this person despite what you did to me, I told her, not because of it. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the tissue I handed her. I asked her what she would do differently if she could go back to that classroom. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded on the blanket. Then she said everything. She'd do everything differently. She said she would focus on understanding why students weren't paying attention instead of punishing them. She said she'd remember that children are people, not problems to be controlled. Her voice broke when she said it, and I believed her. Mrs. Delford looked at me with red eyes and said she wanted to write letters to as many former students as she could find. She wanted to acknowledge her harmful teaching methods and apologize to anyone willing to listen. I told her honestly that some people wouldn't want to hear from her. Some of them might still be angry or hurt, or just want to forget she ever existed, but others might need the apology. She said she understood and would respect whatever response she got. On her last day in my care, she handed me an envelope with my name written on it in shaky handwriting. I opened it later in the break room and found 3 pages of careful script. She apologized specifically for the ear-pinching incident. She described what she did and acknowledged the trauma it caused. The letter wasn't perfect. There were still hints of self-justification buried in some of the sentences, Little phrases about the pressure she was under and the expectations placed on teachers back then. But it was more accountability than I ever expected to get from her. I helped transfer her to the rehab facility, transport, the next morning. I made sure she was comfortable in the wheelchair, had her medications and paperwork. She held my hand for a moment before the transport aide wheeled her toward the elevator. "You are an exceptional nurse," she told me, her voice soft. "And an exceptional person." I told her I hoped her recovery went well. After she left, I sat in the break room with her letter spread out on the table in front of me. I read it, again, slowly this time, paying attention to every word. It wasn't everything I might have wanted. It didn't erase what happened or undo the damage. But it was something real. She saw me. She acknowledged what she did. That mattered more than I expected it to. I realized I didn't need her to be perfectly sorry or completely transformed into a different person. I just needed her to see me as a human being and acknowledge the harm she caused. I pulled out my phone and called my mother. She answered on the second ring, and I told her everything that happened over the past few weeks. About taking care of Mrs. Delford, about our conversations, about the apology and the letter. My mother was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she asked, "Are you okay?" I thought about the question and realized I actually was okay. I told her that standing up to Mrs. Delford as an adult, while still choosing compassion over cruelty, felt like completing something that started when I was 9 years old. My mother's voice was thick with emotion when she said she was proud of me. My supervisor called me into her office that afternoon. I thought maybe there was a problem with Mrs. Delford's discharge paperwork, but instead she told me she wanted to talk about how I handled the situation. She said she knew about my history with the patient, and she'd been watching carefully to make sure I was okay. She said she would have understood completely if I'd requested reassignment, but she was impressed that I chose to work through it. "You handled a difficult situation with professionalism and integrity," she said. I felt proud of myself in a way I didn't expect. Not just proud of my nursing skills, but proud of who I was as a person. I made a choice to be better than the hurt that was done to me. I chose to break the cycle instead of continuing it. That felt like something worth being proud of. That night, I got a message from Sarah, the former student who had reached out before. She said she was glad I got some kind of closure with Mrs. Delford, even if it wasn't perfect. She'd been thinking about our conversation a lot, and it helped her process some of her own memories from that day. We started making plans to meet for coffee the next time I had a weekend off. I realized this whole thing had given me something I didn't expect. It wasn't just about facing Mrs. Delford or getting an apology. It was about connecting with someone who understood what that classroom felt like, who carried similar scars, who knew exactly why certain things still made me flinch. We had both survived the same trauma and grown up trying to make sense of it. That shared understanding felt valuable in a way I couldn't quite explain. I found myself thinking about the 9-year-old version of me a lot over the next few days. The girl who stared out the window at a bird building its nest because she was bored and curious and already knew her multiplication tables. I wished I could go back and tell her things, that she wasn't a problem child, that her mind wandering to interesting things didn't make her bad or disrespectful, that her curiosity and intelligence were gifts, not flaws that needed to be punished. I wanted to tell her that she would grow up to be strong and compassionate and whole, despite what happened to her, that she would build a good life and help people, and choose kindness even when it was hard. That little girl deserved to know those things. But all I could do was hold her memory gently and try to give her the compassion she should have received back then. My husband noticed something different about me when I got home from my shift a few days later. He said I seemed lighter somehow, like I'd put down something heavy I'd been carrying without realizing it. I told him about everything that happened with Mrs. Delford, about the choice I made to forgive her and treat her with dignity, even when I had the power to do otherwise. He listened quietly, and when I finished, he said he was proud of me. "It takes real strength," he said, "to choose integrity over revenge, especially when the revenge would feel justified." I told him I was proud of me, too, and saying it out loud made it feel more real. I took Mrs. Delford's letter and put it in my locker at work. I folded it carefully and tucked it behind my extra stethoscope and the protein bars I kept for long shifts. I wanted it there as a reminder of something important I'd learned. Healing isn't about getting perfect justice or complete closure. It's about choosing who you want to be when you have power over someone who hurt you. Mrs. Delford had power over me when I was 9, and she used it to humiliate and hurt me. 26 years later, I had power over her, and I chose to be better than she was. I chose compassion over cruelty, even when cruelty would have felt satisfying. That choice, more than her apology or her recognition or anything else, felt like the real victory. I had broken the cycle instead of continuing it. So, I want to ask you, if you were in my shoes facing the person who caused you so much pain, what choice would you have made? Would you have sought revenge or found a way to heal? Let me know in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts.